All
I got
right.
to see two ends of the spectrum. I love, hearing what he said about, how he did so well against a guy like McGraw, and the same thing with Forge. We know tipping pitches has been a thing forever. We've even
Right.
seen it in the playoffs. It's kind of interesting to know a guy like Bob Forge, who had a pretty good career in the major leagues, spanned over a decade, for a catcher, and that just reaffirms this idea that catchers make the best managers, and
Yeah.
and that's a reason why he managed guys that had some success. I saw he managed a guy, Francisco Cabrera. If anyone here knows baseball history, we know this: the Sid Bream score that won the Braves the '92 pennant, where they lost to the Blue Jays. Who got that hit? Francisco Cabrera. Who managed him? Barry Foote. So again, just another little nice side note there. And I wonder where he picked up some of his baseball acumen from. So it's interesting. Francisco Cabrera, also a catcher like Barry Foote.
Well, and by the way, for whatever it's worth, I did play the sport for 6 years, and I was a catcher.
There you go.
Did I ever tell you that?
You did tell me that, but you know what you and me have in common? That Mark Littell have in common. They played baseball in the major leagues. We didn't. So we can only
big
just
deal. Oh, come on, you can't even compare that.
We see that. That's what I'm saying, though. They're on two different sides. of the
But let me tell you something, Weiss. Okay, hold on. I knew how to go ahead and I knew how to go ahead and what do you call it? Now you got me
flabbergasted. Got you flabbergasted.
Yeah, now you got me a little tongue tied there. No, I remember when I used to go ahead and frame pitches quite a bit. I took a beating back there like you wouldn't believe. And when I caught, pal, okay, I was only like 70, 80 pounds, taking a beating. I didn't have the old luxury of a nutty buddy that Mark Littell developed.
Yeah.
My dad had a sporting goods store back in Oak Park, Michigan. But I enjoyed catching because, you know what? It is a thinking man's position.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of two positions on the diamond outside of pitching that you're in the game at all time. And catchers generally do complete games where pitchers don't complete games.
Yes, sir. And I would argue that catchers are the pitcher's best friends. Other than the umpire that you establish a rapport with, which a catcher has a part in establishing that rapport with too. Catchers will help you get a lot of strikes that you won't normally get. I mean, Greg Maddux didn't have a good relationship with Javi Lopez. That's why he always preferred a guy like Eddie Perez.
Right.
But they had that relationship. And, I always had good relationships with my catchers, not only because I went to school with them and I only played up and through high school, but because, we talked about the game plan together, because me and the catcher, the pitcher and the catcher themselves, we're responsible for pretty much what happens. We're responsible for where the ball goes.
Well, I'll admit to you that I got nailed for catcher's interference all the time to make sure they got the ball before I could swing it.
You did tell me a story like that.
I would. I'm just being frank with you, man.
You got thrown out of the game once, didn't you?
No, I never did get thrown out of the game at all.
Oh, okay.
But I'll tell you what, I used to talk the umpire's ear off all the time and distract him to get those pitches any way that I could get an edge from my pitcher.
If he's
not that should surprise you,
so he'll
right?
say strike, right? Yeah.
I didn't go that way. I just, hey, that was a little bit, you owe me one here. It's just about manipulating the system, distracting him a little bit, frame the pitches, and all of a sudden my pitchers are in a position to win.
I want to briefly touch on something he said, and I'll be brief with it, but I love what he said, that baseball is a game of statistics, and it's kind of true. I mean, your diehard NFL fan may know who's the all-time leader in passing touchdowns, but there's just numbers in baseball that are so universal, and you can pretty much ask somebody who's not even the biggest fan of baseball, and they'll know that 56 is Joe DiMaggio. If I were to say 714 to you, who am I talking about? Babe Ruth.
Right.
If I were to say, Al Downing, what offensive player am I talking about? I'm talking Hank Aaron.
Well, you're a different breed, although. Wait, no.
But what I'm saying is, and he's right, baseball is a game of statistics, and we tend to evaluate players on the basis of that. There obviously are physical means that we look to evaluate players, maybe, like that, Dan Vogelback with the Seattle Mariners, respectively. Great hitter, but he's a designated hitter because of his size. We don't look to him to be a good defensive first baseman, and he doesn't play first base because we don't look to him to do that because of the physicality that he exudes.
Well, you're a different cat anyways. You know every number on the darn planet, so it doesn't matter.
But
more power to you, though.
No, I mean, Barry's totally right, and I love, it's like Bob Uecker. I mean, guy's got a sense of humor, and he hit good pitchers. It's the same thing. Bob Uecker hit Sandy Koufax pretty well, and this guy, hit Tug McGraw pretty well. So, and Phil Niekro and a bevy of other really great major league players. But yeah, I mean, he reaffirms that idea that baseball is, it's a numbers game, and I think that is one of the myriad of things that makes it singular.
All right, we are live here on the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network, and joining us right now is Bill Winters. And Bill, welcome back to the Sports Exchange. How are you, buddy?
What's up, Motor?
Motor. Well, I'll tell you what, get ready for another edition of Motor Mouth the Wild Bill Winners tomorrow, which we'll talk about the XFL draft. But before we do that, we get to talk about the Lions and the Green Bay Packers and that officiating. Tell me about those plays. Were they big gaffes or what?
Yeah, they were just stupid. I don't know how to put it any other way. And quite frankly, it's an epidemic. It's just not happening in the Lions game. It's happening throughout the league. And it's not working. So we got to redirect and learn how to master this technology by making some adjustments.
Yeah, I mean, really, both of those two plays come from a guy, that's never had those happen before. His credibility is what it is, and all of a sudden he gets flagged for both. That to me is mind-boggling.
Well, you look at it this way, Scott. We've got holding, and I'm a lineman. I can tell you some of the holding calls are absolutely ridiculous. Roughing the passer. Honest to God, they're so ticky-tack right now that when a guy like Troy Aikman's jumping out of the booth, you got a problem. Pass interference, subjective. I think that there have been 25 reviews on pass interference, only one overturn. But they're just missing them. And then the hands to the face. So we've got four avenues that the NFL need to adjust it because the integrity of the game is, being lost. Right. And people are becoming incredibly frustrated. And like remember I told you before, I usually use the pendulum model. To the left is liberalism and safety and social justice and all that, and all the way to the right, is money and those types of things. And that pendulum has to swing back to the middle because we're so far to the left right now that we actually have an epidemic of ridiculous calls that are going too far to protect the safety of the game, and it's ruining the game at the same time. Not
even to mention, there was a video that surfaced on Twitter last night that showed the Packers, before, I believe they were on defense, had 13 men on the field, and that penalty wasn't called against them. I mean, I thought we had this problem in 2012 when we had the replacement refs at the start of that season, but what is this? Yeah, this has been terrible, man.
Right, then the Lions get nailed for 12, but obviously somehow the math doesn't work.
Well, I saw one of the head coaches, Jack Del Rio, talking about it. The refs are pretty good, but I think they need more training and need more experience. And maybe have them do this full time because the hand is quicker than the eye. When you don't have a lot of experience, some of these refs are just guilty of guessing. Or missing things completely. And, it's just, like I said, it's that too, Louis, too many men in the field. It's just missing too much.
It's pretty bad when I go to look up officiating on Twitter, and before I type in OFF, I see officiating Lions Packers as the third trending thing in that Google search. So, this thing has sparked a lot of outrage from owners to players. There's Barry Sanders making comments on this thing. Barry Sanders, who infamously does not have a good relationship with the Lions because of the instability that ensued during his tenure there. But, come on, man. What is going on with these refs?
I don't think, I've learned a long time ago not to take things too seriously because I remember watching a few years ago Kansas City playing the Pittsburgh Steelers in the playoffs, and all the defensive end was doing was running past the offensive tackle, getting about a foot past him, then crashing to the ground. And because the offensive tackle had his hands extended, they called him holding. And they called it 2 or 3 times and killed the game. And I had that happen to me in the Grey Cup. If you watch my YouTube channel, you'll see I get called for holding, and all the guy did was run by me. And because I had my hands extended past my waist, going into the right as the guy was rushing up the field, even though I didn't even touch him, or just kind of shoved him a little bit, he was holding. And, I consider holding and grabbing, so it's completely subjective. That's why you can't take things too seriously today. But in this world, with the kids, people gambling, and trying to relax, and watch a game, you don't need to see so many flags. You don't need to see so many tic-tac calls or missed calls, and it's compounding to the point now where we've got to address the issue maybe with something like a sky cam, where we can have somebody overrule these things from above. and also maybe tone down some of these calls that are ticky-tack. I've just seen games be influenced. I mean, that is probably going to cost the Lions their season.
Yeah, unfortunately.
They've gone from first place to last place.
And ironically, this is an organization that has been plagued by these kinds of things. When you look at the history, the Calvin Johnson rule became a rule as a result of what took place at Soldier Field. That wasn't good enough. I think if you go ahead and predate back to the Dallas Cowboys about that pass interference and now this, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other ones, this poor organization gets hit with a lot of these bad calls, and obviously they've struggled through the years, but don't give me any other reasons to have issues, because, they played a good football game. The one thing a lot of people are saying, though, that you can't get into a field goal kicking contest with the Packers. I get it, but let's be realistic. It's one thing to have one call like that, but now the NFL's even admitted that one of those calls shouldn't have been made either, Bill.
Yes. No argument here. They're affecting the integrity of the game.
Yeah. I mean, and unlike college football, which reviews every single play on the planet, how many plays can you review until these games go into 3.5 hours? I mean, where is there a line to be drawn, Bill?
Well, I think there's an answer a little bit in reading what some of the other people have said. I think we have some guy above who basically on instant time can overrule something or call something that's been flagged. Then we can speed up the game a little bit or not lose more time to it, and maybe cut down the number of seconds between plays. You're losing the younger audience because the games are too long to begin with. There's flags on every play, and it's just we've got to make that adjustment back to the middle where we're not making so many calls, and then if we do see something that's subjective, that we have a way to get a quick remedy to the situation, and also somebody can also overrule something that maybe not be called if the ref doesn't throw a flag on, let's say something like pass interference. Somebody from above who has an aerial view of it, who's watching it, can basically swap the game and do it. So, I think there's a way to do it, but they're going to have to sit in a room and make the adjustment. Technology is here to stay, but I don't think that we need to be having it so far to the left now that it's slowing down the game, hurting the integrity. And I'm pretty confident that somehow, some way, they'll make the adjustment because they're still finding their way through this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just blows me away that you can have so much technology, but yet you still can't get the calls right. I mean, even hockey's not used the technology to a point where at least when they saw an issue with the goal situation, that they've even gotten to a point where they're finally getting some of those right. But the NFL is such a much bigger industry monetarily than hockey, and yet with all the money and resource available, we continue to see more talk away from the football games for something that's totally unnecessary. Let me go over one piece of breaking news with you that came in, and tell me your thoughts about it. The Jacksonville Jaguars, Bill, did a good job holding out, and they shipped Jalen Ramsey for 2 first-round picks and a fourth-round pick. We have a few minutes to go on this. What are your thoughts about that trade, Bill?
Where'd they trade him to?
Los Angeles Rams. Well, you're getting some new information. Good.
I just got in the door. I'm watching the Nationals right now.
No big deal.
Marcus Peters also got traded to
right.
The Ravens.
From the Rams.
Right. So, but Jalen Ramsey, we could probably talk about this a little bit more, but we have a couple minutes to go. The Jaguars, I give them a lot of credit. They held out. They got their 2 number ones, and you've got a fourth-round pick to go with it. For Ramsey, who gets the better of that trade, Jacksonville or the Rams? Future versus present.
I think it's a wash.
Yeah.
Because Khalib is out.
Right.
So they've got to make some adjustments over there. There's only one DB, so it's how they play as the unit back there. So I would say right now it's a wash. It's a toss-up to who got the better deal.
Okay, Lewis has a quick question, then we'll preview tomorrow's show.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Bill, I made this point with Anthony Wood earlier where I thought that the trade of Ramsey and the acquiring of the first-round picks, which they got in return for him, was like a signal that I believe they have a little bit more faith in Minshew than we expected. Maybe they're going to use those pieces to go after somebody in the offseason. When the draft comes around 2020, they have a first-round draft pick in 2021 as well. Maybe they draft somebody that's a big part in his development. Maybe, say, a wide receiver. They work to shore up the offensive line. I just